Fight us. That's all they said. 3 black belt Marines, 1 mat, 1 crowd, 1 woman they didn't understand. She didn't argue, didn't posture, just stepped forward, calm, silent, unreadable. What they didn't ask was who she actually was. Didn't check her record, didn't know what kind of training she came from, or what it meant to challenge someone like her without clearance. They thought they were proving something. They were triggering something they weren't ready for. And by the time Command opened her file, the entire bay realized just how far out of their depth they were. She wasn't just a Navy SEAL, she was a karate master. Before we show you what happened inside that training bay, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss these stories of Navy SEAL women. Let's get into it. Camp Rook wasn't built for diplomacy. It didn't have the polish of a command center or the silence of a classified ops hub. It was loud, physical, scarred from years of reconfiguration. Half the barracks looked like they'd been converted from aircraft hangars. The other half still carried scorch marks from long-forgotten gear tests. But for all its rough edges, Camp Rook had one very sharp center, the combatives wing. It wasn't listed that way on any paperwork. Officially, it was the Joint Close Quarters Readiness Complex, a mouthful of bureaucratic syllables meant to sound impartial. But on the ground, everyone knew it belonged to the Marines. They ran the mats, they set the tone, and if you didn't train loud, you didn't train at all. Chief Petty Officer Aya Kincaid arrived just after 0630, unannounced, uncelebrated, and exactly on time. She carried no visible rank insignia beyond her collar tabs, wore no SEAL trident, and didn't bring a single personal item beyond a small rucksack, a sealed folder tucked under one arm, and a rolled-up PT towel clipped to the side strap. She handed her orders to the MP at the gate without speaking. The MP read the name, blinked, then waved her through without a word. Inside admin, the intake clerk hesitated before processing her file. "You're Navy, right?" the woman asked, scrolling down the digital sheet. Aya nodded once. "Are you here for oversight or—" She replied simply, "Evaluation." The voice wasn't cold, just precise, like someone used to making words count. Staff Sergeant Dyer, the Marine handling combatives orientation, was already halfway through briefing another junior instructor when she entered the office. He turned, glanced at the file, then at her. "You here for admin oversight?" "Evaluation," she repeated. He looked back down. "You'll be observing from the sidelines for your first week. Take notes, don't interrupt. That cool with you, Chief?" She gave no indication of approval or disapproval. Just took the copy of the training schedule from his desk, tucked it into the folder, and turned to go. The base itself ran on noise. In the combatives wing, belt color carried more weight than service branch. Marines strutted around in rash guards with custom patches, some stitched with slogans like "Tap Fast, Live Long." The walls bore monthly highlight photos, mostly Marines, showing high-angle takedowns, ground control finishes, and the occasional bloodied nose frozen mid-frame like a trophy. When Aya first stepped through the double doors of Bay 3, no one noticed. The mats were already packed. A red belt instructor barked cadence over grappling drills while 2 junior trainees sparred under loose supervision. Then someone did notice and laughed. "Who's the Navy clerk?" Another voice followed, louder. "Observer on deck." She didn't flinch, didn't react, just walked to the corner, took a knee, opened her notebook, and began to watch. Corporal Mason Rourke didn't need to wear a red belt to be recognized. Everyone already knew who ran the bay. The man had 3 things that mattered more than rank at Camp Rook: an undefeated combatives record, a loud presence, and an Instagram account with enough mat footage to make half the junior ranks call him sensei unironically. He noticed Aya Kincaid's name on the evaluator clipboard by the second morning. "Kincaid," he said out loud, squinting at the roster sheet posted near the hydration station. "New Navy admin." Lance Corporal Vance looked up from his phone, smirking. "Probably checking our technique with a clipboard while we're tossing bodies." "Pencil foo," Rourke grinned. "She got a belt?" "Just khaki," Vance replied. "That counts?" The laughter echoed across the mats. Nearby, Sergeant Harlow didn't join in, but his expression showed faint amusement. Harlow wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His ego was mechanical, not theatrical. He was the kind of Marine who believed humbling people was a form of mentorship. Pain was pedagogy, especially when applied to outsiders. When Aya passed the beltboard wall later that morning, Rourke was already mid-roll, but he noticed. Eyes tracked her from under his opponent's elbow. She stood to the side, clipboard open, face unreadable, posture still. They didn't like that. The belt culture at Camp Rook wasn't just vanity, it was infrastructure. Black belts were treated like rank. Match wins were bragged about more than weapons quals. The Marines had turned the Bay into a miniature fiefdom, loud, sweaty, and ruled by friendly challenge doctrine. If you couldn't win, you weren't respected. If you wouldn't fight, you didn't belong. By day 3, the nickname started, Karate Clerk. She carries that notebook like it's a shield, Vance snorted. Maybe she's scared to take the mat, someone else added. Or maybe Navy's just soft. Aya heard none of it. Or if she did, she gave no sign. She watched. She documented. She moved with a stillness that made noise feel like background static. But she didn't interrupt. She didn't challenge. And that made it worse. Because in the Bay's social chain, silence wasn't strength. It was seen as permission. And the belt club? They smelled blood. What unsettled Aya wasn't the lack of discipline. It was the lack of structure. She saw it in the drills. Instructors casually letting sparring get too aggressive, taps being ignored, foot sweeps done at full velocity. One private limped off after a session and nobody blinked. It wasn't training, it was theater. Swagger sold, better than technique. She made notes, she didn't intervene, not yet. That afternoon, as she left Bay 3 through the back hallway, she passed Vance lounging by the lockers, phone out, front camera angled. He hit record, leaned close, and whispered just loud enough. She's scared. Aya didn't break stride. But Vance caught his own grin in the reflection behind her and froze because she hadn't looked back. She'd already seen him coming. On Thursday morning, the Bay was running live spar rotations, the kind they always called controlled, even when the sound of bodies hitting the mat said otherwise. Aya stood with her clipboard near the edge of the circle, shoulders relaxed, expression unreadable. The Marines moved through pairs like a conveyor belt, grips, shoots, sprawls, resets, while an instructor barked time, and the rest of the Bay watched like it was a spectator sport. Corporal Rourke was paired with a junior trainee, barely out of schoolhouse, still trying to prove he belonged. The kid had a white belt, nervous hands, and that rigid posture that came from wanting to impress men who didn't care. The round started clean, a few tie-ups, a scramble. Rourke let the kid get just enough position to feel confident. Then he took it away. He snapped into a wrist control and rolled the elbow inward like he was closing a door. The trainee's face pinched, eyes widening. It wasn't a submission that needed pressure. It was a submission that needed restraint. Rourke didn't. There was a sharp, involuntary gasp from the kid, an ugly sound that made 3 nearby Marines glance over. The trainee tapped fast 3 times, desperate. Rourke held it for half a second longer. Not long enough to injure, but long enough to send a message. When he finally released, the trainee sat back on his heels, flexing his fingers, trying not to show pain. He forced a laugh because that's what you did here. Pain was currency. If you couldn't spend it, you didn't belong. Aya's pen moved once. A short note, a timestamp, a 2-word remark. Rourke noticed. Not because she made a face, not because she called it out, because she wrote it down and didn't look impressed. After the rotation ended, he walked over with that easy swagger of a man who'd never been told no in his favorite room. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his glove and glanced at her clipboard like it was an insult. "So you're logging us?" he asked, smiling too wide. Aya looked up once. "I'm recording standards." "Right." He leaned in like they were sharing a joke. "We've never had an evaluator who didn't spar. It's tradition." She didn't blink. "Evaluators don't participate in candidate testing." Rourke's grin held. "This isn't testing. It's just the mat. That's still participation." He tilted his head. "What's the harm? 1 round. You can even pick the pace." Aya shut her clipboard calmly and tucked the pen into its loop. "I don't demonstrate unless requested by command." The words were soft, but they landed like a closed door. Rourke's smile tightened. A small muscle jumped near his jaw. Behind him, Vance, Isiance, and two others were watching, already enjoying the tension like it was the warm-up before a fight. "Come on, Navy," Vance called. "Don't hide behind policy." Another Marine added, "It's just a roll. You scared of getting tapped by a corporal?" Aya didn't respond to them. She didn't even turn. She looked only at Rourke. "I'm not here to compete." His eyes narrowed slightly, still smiling. "No, you're here to judge." "I'm here to verify," she said. That word, verify, made the space around them colder because it implied one thing they couldn't stand, that their kingdom wasn't absolute. Later that day, the chow line was long and loud, men packed shoulder to shoulder with trays and jokes. Vance was behind Aya, voice projecting so the people at the table could hear it. "A belt don't mean anything if you won't fight," he said, grinning. "You can't grade what you can't survive." Aya didn't look back. She picked up her tray, moved to a corner seat, and ate in silence, back to the wall, face toward the exit, exactly like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anybody in that room. On her way out, she passed the belt photo wall again, rows of smiling Marines, arms raised in victory. Her gaze stopped briefly on one plaque, polished, centered, highlighted by a small overhead light, Instructor of the Year, CPL, Mason Rourke. Aya's eyes didn't linger long, just long enough to remember where his ego lived. Then she kept walking. The bay was empty at 0540, fluorescence overhead, mats swept, air still smelling faintly of vinyl and chalk dust. Most of the base hadn't even touched coffee yet. Aya Kincaid stood barefoot on mat A, jacket folded neatly on the bench, gloves tucked beneath it. She moved with quiet economy, nothing sharp, nothing theatrical. Her footwork glided over the mat in slow arcs, tracing imaginary opponents. Each motion paused at its apex, then reset. Kata, traditional, controlled. The kind of flow work no one taught anymore. She wasn't practicing, she was remembering. She shifted into a Shudo-Yuke block, rotated low, pivoted into a back stance. Her hands moved with surgical economy. No wasted angles, no mimicry. Just deep knowledge, buried so far it didn't need an audience to be real. A maintenance contractor pushing a mop paused outside the glass wall, watching for a moment longer than intended. By noon, someone in the mess tent had heard about it. "Hey, that Navy evaluator? Someone said she was doing karate forms this morning. Like real old school stuff." "Karate?" another asked. "Like point sparring stuff?" "No, like legit movement, elbows tucked, shoulders down, kind of scary." The story rippled, quiet at first, then louder, carried on the current of boredom and speculation that fed every base rumor mill. "She's probably a black belt." "Nah, she'd be bragging if she was." "Or maybe she's quiet because she's good." It reached Rourke by the end of the day. He heard it third hand from a junior who didn't realize what they were repeating. "She was doing kata at dawn," the private said. "Yeah, really clean movement." Rourke snorted. "Great! Now the clerk's a ninja." But the joke didn't land quite the same, because if it was true, if the woman who'd refused his challenge all week actually knew how to fight, then his dominance wasn't secure. And that was unacceptable. He needed it public, on his turf. He started setting up what the base called a Friday exhibition, a casual post-duty combatives showcase. No rank, no politics, just sparring, open floor, mat time, spectators welcome. It was usually harmless, but this one wasn't. He added her name to the evaluator presence list. Not as a fighter, yet. Just a watcher. That was the bait. He posted it on the shared bulletin board, added it to the group thread Vance moderated, challenge night. He even added a joke line. "Bring your belts, even the imaginary ones." The crowd would show up expecting blood. And if she didn't fight, he'd win again, louder than ever. Dyer caught wind of it that evening. He found Aya filing her notes outside Bay 2, her clipboard balanced on her lap. "They're gonna push you to spar," he said. No emotion, just a quiet heads up. Aya didn't look up. She just said, "Then I'll hold them to standard." He nodded once and walked off. That night, Inner quarters, she opened her sealed folder for the first time since arrival. Inside was her clearance sheet. Seal, status, active, combatives instructor. Karate, 5th Dan, verified. She didn't smile. She just folded it shut again and waited. By the time 1900 hit, Bay 3 looked more like a Friday night fight club than a military facility. Benches were pulled back against the walls. Spectators leaned over folded arms, water bottles in hand, ready for entertainment. Phones were tucked, mostly, though more than a few were angled discreetly for footage. This was challenge night. No orders, no paperwork, just tradition. Marines sparred Marines. Rank didn't matter. It was ego versus ego, under the pretense of skill exchange. Half training, half theater. Corporal Rourke stood at center mat with his sleeves rolled up and a practiced grin on his face. Sweat already beaded at his collarbone, not from exertion, but from anticipation. "All right," he called out, loud enough for the far wall to hear. "Who's stepping up first?" The crowd cheered as a pair of sergeants took the mat and rolled through a quick, high-energy round. It wasn't clean, but it was flashy, enough to get the room buzzing. Near the back, Aya Kincaid stood silently. She wasn't in a GI, no rash guard, just standard PT pants, her boots tucked neatly under the bleachers, clipboard in hand, observing, neutral, completely still, but she was the real target tonight. Rourke motioned to the center. "Before we get too deep, can we just address the elephant in the room?" Laughter. He looked straight at her. "We've got an evaluator here who's been real shy about stepping on the mat." Aya didn't blink, didn't shift. "She's here to grade us," Rourke continued, pacing, "but never once touched the mat herself. Now, I don't know about you, but I was taught, if you can't do, you don't teach." A few claps, a few whistles. Someone yelled from the corner, "Fight us!" Rourke turned, mock bowing toward her. "Come on, Chief, just one round. I'll even go easy." She raised her head calmly. "I'm not here to entertain." There was no malice in her voice, no heat, just precision, like a statement from someone who'd already weighed the consequences and didn't need applause. That only made it worse. The room started murmuring, some awkward, some amused. Dyer stepped forward from the edge, arms folded. "Enough. This isn't sanctioned." But Rourke didn't stop. He raised his voice louder now. "If you're really an expert, prove it!" A second voice jumped in. "Vance, of course, what's the point of a belt if you hide behind a clipboard?" That's when Aya finally spoke again. "If command orders a demonstration," she said evenly, "I'll comply." The room paused, because she'd just taken it out of their hands. They couldn't mock her into fighting. Only authority could make it real, and now that authority was walking through the door. Lieutenant Alvarez stepped in from the hallway, head turning slightly as the noise died. He scanned the mat, the crowd, the tension thick in the air. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He just asked flatly, "What's going on here?" Lieutenant Alvarez wasn't the type to entertain nonsense. His presence alone was enough to press the air out of the bay like a vacuum seal. He scanned the room with clipped disapproval, combat boots grinding slightly on the mat edge, eyes narrowing as they registered the crowd, the posture, the heat. "This isn't a fight club," he said flatly, looking at no one in particular. Rourke raised both palms, smile quick and performative. "Just morale night, sir. Light exhibition." Dyer stepped forward, exhaling through his nose. "Sir, with respect, this wasn't scheduled. It's being used to bait the evaluator." "Bait?" Alvarez asked, turning slightly. Aya Kincaid hadn't moved. She still stood near the edge, clipboard in hand, spine straight, face neutral. Her eyes were locked on the lieutenant, not asking, not accusing, just waiting. Alvarez took 2 steps forward, hands behind his back. "Chief, you've been pressured?" Aya didn't blink. "They've requested repeated non-sanctioned engagement. I've declined." The words were clinical, not defensive, just logged facts spoken aloud. Alvarez's jaw tightened. "And if I asked you to demonstrate the standard, could you?" She gave a single nod. "Yes, sir." The bay went still. No more laughter, no more baiting, just a very real awareness that the air had changed. Rourke's grin didn't break, but the corners looked thinner now. "If she's really got the credentials, sir, let her show us. One roll." Aya turned her head just slightly. "I don't roll." Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "You're not a grappler?" "I'm a combatives instructor," she replied. "Karate lineage, pressure and redirection, not ground and pound." Vance coughed. "Sounds like an excuse." That's when Rourke pushed his luck. Sir, why not let her do it properly? Give her three of us, one after another, like a tier test. Alvarez's eyes narrowed. You want to be part of a demonstration against a Navy chief with command authorization? Rourke shrugged. Sure. He thought it was clever, but Alvarez just tilted his head toward Aya. Chief, if the conditions are controlled, she said, I'll comply. Then here are the conditions, Alvarez replied, voice even. No head strikes. Controlled takedowns only. No showboating, no theatrics. You get one opponent at a time, 3 total, if she agrees. Aya turned her clipboard over and set it down on the bench. She reached for her gloves, pulled them off slowly, folded them, laid them neatly beside the board. Then she rolled up each sleeve, one at a time. On her right wrist, an old dojo tattoo, black ink, faded from years in the sun. Across her knuckles, faint white scars, linear, symmetrical, deep enough to tell their own story. She stepped onto the mat, didn't crack her neck, didn't flex, didn't smile. She just looked at Alvarez and said, Ready! Rourke stepped onto the mat like he'd been preparing for it all week. Loose shoulders, grinning. His gait was casual but wide, occupying space, asserting presence. He rolled his wrists like a showman, glanced at the crowd, then gave a little mock stretch. You ready, karate clerk? He asked, loud enough to bounce off the far walls. Aya didn't answer. She stood opposite him, feet aligned, knees slightly bent, weight evenly distributed. No bounce, no aggression, just presence. Touch gloves? He offered, stepping forward. She didn't move. I'll take that as a no, he muttered with a smirk. Lieutenant Alvarez stood at the sideline, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Begin. Rourke circled, loose and showy. He dropped into a half crouch, feinted a quick, low shoot, then backed off like he was playing. Aya didn't react. He bounced in again, closer this time, jabbed a hand toward her shoulder, trying to bait movement. Nothing. The third time he lunged. A classic Marine-style takedown attempt, shoulder line drive, aiming to dominate center line through force. It didn't land. Aya stepped off axis a quarter inch, caught his wrist as it extended, rotated her hips in a clean pivot, and used his momentum against him. There was no strike, no shove, just redirection, fluid and practiced. She captured his wrist, folded his elbow inward against its own angle, and turned with a tight hip roll. Rourke's body lifted, weight compromised before he knew it. 1 second, he was upright. Next second, the mat caught his back with a thud. Aya didn't follow through with aggression. She moved into a knee-to-shoulder pin, body balanced, elbow posted, wrist still locked in control. The bay had gone silent, not because it was brutal, but because it was clean. Rourke squirmed beneath the pressure, not panicked, but clearly not expecting it. He tapped, once. Aya immediately released. She rose, one motion, and stepped back without gloating, without flair. She didn't even look down at him. Rourke sat up slowly, laughed. It was too loud, forced, the kind of laugh you use when you want to pretend it didn't count. Okay. He stood, adjusted his rash guard, avoided looking at anyone. A few Marines shifted behind the line. Someone let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Aya turned calmly to Alvarez. Do you want the second demonstration, sir? Her voice hadn't changed. No panting, no tension, like she'd just run a drill she'd done 100 times before. Alvarez gave a quiet nod. Proceed. The second opponent was already stepping forward. But the bay wasn't laughing anymore. Now, they were watching. Sergeant Harlow stepped forward with a very different posture than Rourke. No swagger, no smirk, just calculation. He was the technician of the trio, respected for his grip control, his transitions, his methodical pacing. If anyone could recover the Belt Club's reputation, it would be him. But that assumed Aya Kincaid was operating on the same manual. She wasn't. They squared up. Harlow circled slowly, body low, no taunts, no wasted motion. He feinted once, then twice, testing her stance. Aya didn't chase. She adjusted subtly, shifting her lead foot with quiet precision, giving him no angle to exploit. Harlow moved in with a standard grip exchange, one hand targeting her elbow, the other reaching under to hook balance. She allowed the first contact, then pivoted. It happened fast, but not flashy, just geometry. Aya's back foot swept gently in, her hips rotated under his center line, and his knee lost anchor. He stumbled. She redirected. One shoulder lock later, he was on his side, body pinned with quiet finality. "Reset," Lieutenant Alvarez said, voice steady. Harlow stood up, jaw clenched. He wasn't angry yet, but he was surprised. Second pass. He changed approach, shot lower, aimed for a double leg scooping entry. Aya dropped one knee to the mat, lowered her center, rotated her arms in a circular pressure block, redirected his momentum up and sideways, then caught him with a hip check that left him on his back, pinned again. He tapped. Harder this time. The Bay was murmuring now, not mocking, just processing, because this wasn't brute force. This was someone who understood body mechanics in a way they hadn't trained for. Aya stood again, calm, breath controlled. Then came Vance, smaller, faster, jittery. He stepped up, eyes flicking between her and the wall, clearly trying to psych himself up. He nodded once toward Rourke, then toward Harlow. Like that would undo what had just happened. Aya gave him the same neutral stance. Nothing to exploit. Vance darted in. Chaotic footwork, unpredictable angles, trying to bait her into committing. She didn't. He faked a left feint, tried to roll around into her blind side. She pivoted once, stopped his momentum with a perfectly timed hip rotation, then hooked her leg behind his forward ankle. She didn't slam him. She just redirected gravity. He fell, more surprised than hurt. As he rolled onto his back, Aya stepped to his side and gently posted her weight above his sternum. Not a pin. A pause. Then she looked up, voice clear and level. Speed without structure is panic. She stepped off him without waiting for a tap. The Bay had fallen completely silent. Someone near the lockers muttered under their breath, almost reverently, "That's not karate. That's war." No one argued, because it didn't matter what style she'd used. It had dismantled all three of them, and it wasn't over yet. For a full 10 seconds after Vance hit the mat, no one moved. Not Lieutenant Alvarez, not Dyer, not the Marines lining the walls. The only sound was the soft, ambient hum of the overhead lights and the faint creak of mat tapes settling under weight. Aya stood in the center, shoulders relaxed, posture level. She wasn't breathing hard. Her stance didn't shift. She hadn't fought, she had demonstrated. Alvarez finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, clipped. "Chief, where did you learn that?" Aya's eyes didn't leave him. "Under instruction." The answer was bland, almost dismissive, but the effect landed like a hammer, because anyone who moved like that didn't dabble. That kind of precision came from something deeper. Dyer approached quietly from the sideline. Without speaking, he handed over a single folder. Alvarez flipped it open. It took him less than 5 seconds to find what he needed. He looked up, voice even louder now, meant for the room. "This chief is an active SEAL, assigned as a combatives instructor, certified in multidiscipline close quarters tactics. 5th Dan Karate, verified by Naval Personnel Command." Gasps, some audible, some caught in throats. Marines who'd spent the last week mocking her now shifted uncomfortably. A few stepped back. A couple turned away as if looking at her too long might make it worse. Aya didn't react, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge the announcement. She simply bent down, picked up her gloves from the bench, and tucked them under one arm like it was just another Friday. Corporal Rourke blinked, visibly trying to process the sudden collapse of the world he'd built. He forced a laugh. "Why didn't you say anything?" Aya looked at him for the first time that night. "You didn't ask," she said. "You assumed." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't triumphant. It was just true. Alvarez turned back to the rest of the room. "Match night is over. Phones away. Anyone posting footage will answer to command." The air thinned. Marines suddenly realized their entertainment had turned into evidence. No one protested. Rourke was still standing, hands on hips, blinking too often. Harlow looked at the wall like it had answers. Vance hadn't gotten up yet. Dyer stepped closer to Aya and said, just loud enough to carry, "Anything you want to file?" She shook her head once. Demonstration was sufficient. She turned, walked off the mat, no fist pump, no victory nod, just a quiet exit from the room she'd just dismantled. Rourke followed her with his eyes the whole way out. And in the hollow quiet of that bay, he realized the worst part wasn't that she beat them. It was that she never needed to prove it. They caught her just outside the locker hallway the next evening. Not an ambush, just an embarrassment poorly disguised as confrontation. Rourke, Harlow, and Vance stood near the weight sled rack like they'd wandered there by accident. Aya was coiling resistance bands onto a wall hook, sleeves rolled up, gloves tucked beneath her belt line. You embarrassed us, Rourke said. No heat in it, just the flat tone of a man trying to rewrite the narrative too late. She didn't look over. No, you did that yourselves. Harlow folded his arms, leaning against the caged gear locker. You think you're better than us. Aya turned slightly at that, just enough to meet his eyes. You challenged, she said. You lost. Vance tried to keep it light. Didn't look like a standard Navy demonstration. Aya let the silence hang. Then Harlow pushed the last card he had. You used excessive control. We could report that. That's when she finally moved. She turned fully, calm, level. Go ahead. Her voice didn't rise. The cameras will explain what you won't. That landed. Because everyone knew Bay 3 had full surveillance auto feed. The matte footage was stored, archived, reviewed. No audio, just clean, brutal video. No editing, no spin, just truth. And this time, truth was not on their side. The next morning, the review was already in motion. Lieutenant Alvarez, Staff Sergeant Dyer, a pair of MPs, one officer from base legal. No speeches, no appeals, just paperwork. Rourke, removed from combatives instructor status, placed on probationary conduct status. Harlow, suspended from peer-led training, formal retraining required. Vance, restricted from recording devices during duty hours, issued a formal reprimand. Aya Kincaid requested nothing. She sat silently through the admin review, signed where asked, and left the room before the door had fully shut behind her. Her final words? Standards are enough. That weekend, the Bay looked different. Not on the surface, but in the way people walked through it. Louder egos had gone quiet. The plaques on the wall remained, but the space around them felt like it belonged to someone else now. At 05:30 Monday morning, the mats were empty again. Aya stood alone in the center of Bay 3, moving through slow kata. Each step measured, each rotation smooth. This wasn't performance. It wasn't even routine. It was ritual, discipline. Without an audience, a new recruit lingered at the doorway, clutching his duffel awkwardly, unsure if he was interrupting something sacred. Aya didn't turn her head, just pointed once at the sign-in sheet on the wall. The recruit nodded, took his shoes off, and stepped in. If you were in that bay, would you have accepted the challenge or waited for command to make it official? Do you think martial skill should be proven publicly or privately? And would you respect someone more for staying silent or for talking back? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. Share this story with someone who still thinks silence equals weakness. And while you're here, check out one of our other stories already on your screen. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.